Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Anthony Phillips. Our own Lance Haver will discuss inflated chicken prices across the Commonwealth, and we'll wrap up the year that was in Philadelphia government. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. I was very happy to see the Philadelphia Inquirer was encouraging people to shop at small independent stores. Very nice story, and I'm glad to see them doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Probably doesn't help their advertising dollars.
No, but it's still important for our economy here in Philadelphia.
Very helpful to shop from the local store.
Mm-hmm. And you're going to tell us in a little bit about a story we're not really seeing anywhere else. How long has this been going on before we get into it?
So this is a question about price fixing and what the government's new rules are for antitrust, and when the government chooses to prosecute someone criminally for antitrust or prosecute someone civilly for antitrust.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talk about it, we'll find that, no surprise, major corporations are not run by morons. They're not run by stupid people. They continue to find ways around the laws that go ahead and allow them to fix prices without actually, quote unquote, fixing prices. And that's what's happening. And we're going to see that there's federal government hasn't succeeded, but the state of Washington has, and nobody else, not here in Pennsylvania, not in New Jersey, not in Delaware, has been following the lead of Washington state, which is actually putting money back in consumers' pockets for the Christmas season.
All right. And so before we get to that, we're going to talk to Councilmember Anthony Phillips about a couple of things. The first is his ski mask legislation that passed City Council the other day, and generally what he's looking for, what his priorities are in 2024. So here's our interview with Councilmember Anthony Phillips.
And you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5. I'm Denise Clay Murray, and we are here with Councilmember Anthony Phillips of the 9th District. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I guess, we kind of can't start an interview with you without talking about your most recent legislative accomplishment, which is the anti-masking bill. Can you talk a little bit about that, how it came about and how it made its way from how it came about to City Council to become law?
We in the city of Philadelphia, I was having numerous community meetings, as well as speaking to residents and throughout our district. And oftentimes at some of these community meetings, and also when I spoke to residents, whether not on the Avenue at the rec center or at their home, we heard that there was a sense of lawlessness taking place in the city. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that people were concerned about us not being as tough on crime. And so therefore, one of the things that kept coming up with resounding support, particularly in the 9th District, was that people were concerned about ski masks and how that, the wearing of ski masks has provided a cover up for a lot of individuals to not necessarily have a way to be tracked by the Philadelphia Police Department so that we could solve crime. And so because of that, I was more than, excited about the idea of, helping the Philadelphia Police Department, solve crime through this initiative, because at the end of the day, we can't have this saying that's happening in our city that says no face, no trace. And so oftentimes that's what's causing a low rate in solving a crime, and also prevention as well. That's also was really important in the decision making behind this.
Okay. My big question from the moment this was passed is, how is this going to be enforced, and who is it going to be enforced most often against?
Yeah, right.
Have you all considered that?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. I read your commentary. I thought it was interesting around this. And let me just say that we're very much aware of this of like there's some of the things that will have to go into to make sure that this is an enforceable law. However, what we were more concerned about is making sure people understood that this is something that's not acceptable in a public space. So we were more interested in ensuring that the residents of the city of Philadelphia uh, felt safe at the end of the day, as opposed to thinking about, okay, we thought about the idea of like, okay, what can be done to enforce the law? And the Philadelphia Police Department, I believe, is going to be really capable of making sure that it is enforced. Because ultimately, what it's going to do is they've already said that they already have plans to use it as a tool to address crime. So, for example, if you're walking around a public facility such as a rec center, a school, a library, a park, or so forth, you will, be asked at times to take your mask off, and they want to use it because there's times where there are people that they're actually interested in learning more about because they've been suspects potentially in crime, and so they want to use it as a tool to help really get to the point of like finding out who's the average citizen versus who is just someone that's actually been committing crime in the city of Philadelphia. And I think what the goal of the ban was to get people who have traditionally been just good, law-abiding citizens to understand that we have to get to a sense of normalcy. And what's happening is that now people are. I prayerfully and hopefully will continue to see that like wearing a mask, will taking the mask off will help the Philadelphia Police Department, get to the bottom of a lot of incidents in the city.
Okay. But another question I have is, because of where this is probably going to be enforced the most, these are places that are already part of the 26% of Philadelphians that are either in poverty or in deep poverty. So $250 for a fine is a big hit in those communities.
Yeah.
Has there been any thought to what ultimately happens when you get one of those kids who came in the rec center but didn't take their mask off fast enough, and the next thing you know, they're getting handed a ticket for something they can't afford, and then there's more fees that they can't afford, because I've not paid a ticket before and I've had to pay additional fees once I did pay the ticket. But I have a job. If you're a 16-year-old or worse yet, a 14 or 15-year-old that doesn't have a job, how do you get out of not having a record behind this?
Yeah. Again, I remain confident in the Philadelphia Police Department in their enforcement of this law. And what's going to happen is that they've already mentioned that the Philadelphia Police Department is going to, for 9 times out of 10, invite people to ask people to take the mask off before the fine is even implemented. If there's a refusal to take the mask off, the fine will be implemented. And honestly, sometimes this is why I say to you, Denise, this is really important for us to think about. I went to a lot of different schools throughout the nation and so forth. And, one of the things I'll tell you is that, on a philosophical level, these are the things that you talk about, right? But in reality, what we need to be thinking about is the fact that there are people who are living in neighborhoods who are suffering because people are wearing ski masks in a way where they're nervous every single day that they're walking outside of their door. And so the philosophical part of what this comes with this doesn't really meet the reality, because here's the reality. If you know something is wrong, you're not going to do it, right? You should understand that, at the end of the day, the $250 fine for something that you're committing an offense for because you know something that you shouldn't be doing is actually, for public safety matters, is actually more. It's more or less as important than making sure that at the end of the day people feel safe. And so, the fine itself may be hefty, but it will actually teach you a lesson that you'll never forget. And what I also realized is that my grandmother and my mother and all those so forth, they would never, ever allow me to wear a mask. And a lot of the people who are arguing against the mask bill would never wear a ski mask in professional spaces themselves, or or for any particular reason. And so the reality is that if you're not going to let your children, you're not going to let your family, let yourself do it for the same reasons, what this mask has represented for centuries at this point. We come to understanding that at the end of the day, we have to be able to meet reality. And the reality is that, unfortunately, people are committing crimes with masks, and they've been doing it for a long period of time. And whatever consequence that comes with that is a fine. It's not it's not going to be on your record in terms of like some sort of like public offense, but it's just a fine of something you did with the Philadelphia Police Department. So, yeah.
Okay, so I guess my last question for you is there anything else that you are about to introduce or thinking about introducing in terms of fighting crime now that you've done this? Because because let's keep it 100. The mask is not the crime problem in Philadelphia. It's just not. When you've got people who are running around here with all sorts of firearms and all sorts of stuff like that, the mask is a manifestation of a deeper problem. So now that we have tackled the manifestation, is there anything coming up on the horizon to deal with the deeper problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. My hope is that the Philadelphia City Council, all of us, we're going to collectively work to do the following. One, we have to find ways to get the right prevention youth programs in the city to be a part of the lives of a lot of young people. What's happened is that sometimes we fund organizations that may not be meeting the mark with identifying and connecting the young people that need to be a part of those organizations, so that they can have a space where they can actually do things that are productive as opposed to anti-productive. So that's going to be really important, that we find ways to evaluate and support organizations that are going to focus on prevention. And so, yes, that's something we have to do. In addition to that, we have to improve the quality of life of our city. I believe our streets have to be clean on a regular basis. I believe that we have to find a way to get dilapidated homes refurbished and no longer abandoned. And I also believe that we're going to work consistently. What we're going to also do with the addition with our parents, finding ways to better support parents so that they can help their children. So I'll be working on resources this year, as well as initiatives to help parents become even stronger with helping their kids. Also, I'll be working closely with a number of job agencies to actually do something that Leon Sullivan used to do, which is really help people find employment and get training so they can find employment in the city. All those things, like you said, will help prevent this manifestation. One of the reasons why the mask ban was even implemented is because there was a great concern among myself and many others that this was not going to go away. And the reality is that we're praying that it does. And so unfortunately, sometimes we have to do initiative, like immediate, initiatives to stop something before we take care of something that might take a little longer to take care of. And honestly, my hope is that some of the things that I just mentioned don't take long. We have to kind of like just be aggressive and focus in and do the things that we mentioned, so it doesn't have to feel like a long-term project. But that oftentimes involves, getting everyone to agree on something that you would think is so simple. And right now, we can't get the state or the federal government to agree with most of the city council on these initiatives so that we can, have, better support for our cities, even our gun laws. Like that's going to be really big for helping the city like Philadelphia. And we can't get the state or the federal government to help us with that in that particular way. So yeah, you're right. Long term, I will be working on parent initiatives, not long term, but in the short term, next parent initiatives, quality of life issues, and also working with our school district in Philadelphia to make sure we have the best education, resources for our children.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to give you to Larry McGlynn, my co-host, and you're still listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
All right. Thank you, Denise. And Councilman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So you've been on city council now for, I guess, less than a year. And
Yes. Well, no, a year now. It's been a year.
yeah, a year. Okay. So what has that adjustment been like for you?
It's been actually exciting, but also it's been exciting because you have a real opportunity to serve and help make government stronger than what you ever than what a lot of people imagine. I think for me, what I was more excited about with joining Philadelphia City Council is just having this possibility to help people understand that government can work for people. I didn't want to be a traditional elected official. I wanted people to believe that, oftentimes people believe that politics can be murky, and I wanted people to believe in government and politics again. And by the best way of doing that is just making people feel like, hey, we are servants. We are breaking through red tape for you. We are making sure that you feel like this is about like us and not me. And those things were important. So thus far, what I've learned during my time at Philadelphia City Council is that um, there's ways in which you can be innovative to make government feel more connected to people. What I'm more concerned about with Philadelphia City Council and just in general is that there's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, which is often why why it can't always give the most definitive answers, because a lot of what we do is dependent upon city departments and what city departments need us to do. And so that is why one of the first bills I put together was something I would hope break through red tape, was basically to take a study away from having to, make a decision whether or not schools need speed bumps, because clearly if there's children involved, we need to find a way to make sure that any vehicle is going past the school is able to slow down so we can keep our children safe, because there's constantly hundreds of kids coming out of school every day. And so we want to make sure that red tape is removed, but those things unfortunately are so ingrained in the hall of City Hall that we have to, really go through every single policy or every single department to kind of figure out what is it that we can do to make resources more efficient, more readily accessible to residents in the city. So that's what the first year's been like.
How do you prepare? Because you didn't come in traditionally, right? Somebody runs for council, and then there's 6 months after you win the primary to sort of get ready. You didn't have that. So what was that like from the moment you find out, okay, you're the nominee? Like, how do you start to get ready for all of these challenges that you're going to have?
It was Larry, I'll tell you this much. I had to learn a lot while doing this. I didn't have the privilege of having to work on city council before this to really work at city council to really understand the nuances of it. And to be honest with you, there's no manual for this position. There's no manual even for staff members on what to do. So ultimately, I just had this will that I said to myself, I want to prove a point, right? That people oftentimes are not as excited about government and politics. And I want to prove that an individual like myself, as well as the team members that are around me, we can have a servant mindset that does transformative service. And thus far, I believe that we've done a lot of transformative service in the 9th District. We're not there yet, but we've done, like, for example, we've held, public safety meetings that have come up with solutions around flash mobs. We've held, as we've worked on shutting down some businesses in our community that are causing issues. We've addressed, hundreds of quality of life issues throughout this year, and then also put together legislation such as the nuisance business law, which is going to help us shut down some of these businesses, and then the speed cushions law that I put together, the student pedestrian bill, and then also tractor trailers, helping to get rid of them in 1 year, in our area. And also we're going to be finding places for them, tractor trailers to park, and now in the ski mask bill. And so we're not done yet. There's still more work to do. But yes, learning how to get through all this has not been easy. The other part is in terms of learning, the learning curve, just so you're aware. I think that having people like, a Council President Clark and Kenyatta Johnson and so forth, like these are individuals who help support me throughout the entire year to really help understand the nuances of City Hall. So that was really helpful. But also, what also made it easier for me to come in is that I already had a really strong service background where I was able to explore leadership in a service oriented way. So all I did was just take what was going on, what I was used to in terms of surveying, and I just translated it into what we do in government. So I think that's what made it easy for me, because if you do service really well, like extraordinary well, you can do government pretty well too.
So 2024 is quickly approaching. New council session, new mayor, new council president. What are you planning for 2024, and what are your top priorities?
Yeah, top three priorities are number one, focusing on working with the school district of Philadelphia to address resource gaps to help them so they can become a stronger, asset for our young people. So we're going to be working in our district this year, particularly the 9th district, to also form different community councils as well as other initiatives to make sure that whatever resource gap that is at our schools, we're going to work as a community to fill those resource gaps. So that's one. So education is one. Number two, infrastructure. As we've seen throughout the city of Philadelphia, there's a decline in infrastructure with some of our roads. Our houses are sometimes don't have the funds and resources, our homeowners to really fix some of our homes. Our driveways, our retaining walls, as well as alleyways. I want to make sure that we have the best funding and the best systems to be efficient so we can be able to get our driveways fixed, retaining walls fixed, alleyways, anything, and also help people to get the loans and become more aware of the loans and grants available to help rebuild, repair their homes, and also get rid of some of these, vacant spaces and nuisance businesses that are causing issues in our community too. And then lastly, I'm really concerned about, quality of life issues, and bureaucracy. How do we get through the red tape of anything that, for example, is like, we're going to be working on legislation and initiatives that are going to help us address red tape in the city of Philadelphia and making resources more accessible and readily available for residents. And then we're going to be focused on some, doing some community engagement initiatives that could really help the residents of the 9th district thrive and, continue to grow.
Now, let me ask you the big question.
Yes.
And a micro answer, a macro answer, whatever makes sense. But how do we begin to get poverty under control in Philadelphia?
Whew. The first thing that needs to happen with poverty to get poverty under control in Philadelphia is that and this is why I'm going to be working on this year. We definitely need strong, number one, parent engagement with their families. I tell you this why. Here's why I tell you. I grew up in poverty, and so did a lot of people. But the only thing that really helped change the direction of myself and many others is that, like, my neighborhood, like I had a neighbor who we grew up in this same age, same neighborhood. The difference was the engagement of our parents. My mom she didn't have the answer to everything, but she would say, go sit on the porch with Mr. Cleve. He'll be able to help mentor you and support you. Or she'll bring me to a center or a church or something to surround me with people who could really help me stay in a positive environment. So I think that finding ways to help parents become better, because parents, a lot of them have great intentions and we love them. They love their kids, but we want to, but unfortunately there's a wealth gap sometimes where there's some really highly resourced families that have the ability to seek more resources to become better parents. Unfortunately, low-income families don't have that all the time at their disposal. So I want to be able to help address that with helping them understand what is it that can help you become the best and the most amazing parent you could possibly be for your kids. Because once that happens, our children will begin to have a little bit more, find ways to create a level of self-initiative and push to drive themselves out of poverty. In our schools, which our incoming mayor is excited about. I think that's going to be key to drive out poverty. In addition to the poverty situations, that our schools have to become better. We cannot allow for the school district to underperform. And so we have to hold them to the fire. Now, here's the thing. People are speaking a lot about these schools. That is true. We need to renovate all the schools in the district. However, what is also equally as important is that we got to have students and parents involved in a way which we're going to make sure that the students are going to be ready to learn, the teachers are going to be top notch, and they're going to be engaged. Because we have a couple of schools in the city of Philadelphia that are fully renovated, and the same problem still persists. And it has nothing to do with the fact that schools are not renovated. So we need to have renovated schools, and we need to have schools that have strong academic achievement with strong extracurriculars, as well as parent engagement to make sure the students are ready every day to come to learn, be respectful, and focus. And that's going to drive out poverty. What I don't believe is going to drive out poverty is what we've been doing. We need to be able to provide people with resource help and support. However, we can't allow for that resource help to be a clutch. It needs to be something that helps you get your foot in the door and going every single day. We need to find a way to help people become self-sufficient. And I do want to continue a lot of the resources that we have to support people who are in low-income situations, because heck, I benefited from them myself. But the reality is that we just need to find a way to make sure that we do more so they can drive themselves out of poverty in their, through their own will.
All right. Councilmember Anthony Phillips, thank you so much. And I'm going to turn you back over to Denise Clay here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Thank you, Councilman, for joining us. I'm sorry, I'm trying to deal with a cold. Have a good holiday, and thank you for giving us some of your time.
Thank you, Denise. Appreciate you. And thank you, Lawrence, as well.
All right. We'd like to thank Councilmember Anthony Phillips for joining us here on the Philadelphia Hall Monitor. And I believe we have Denise Clay Murray with us.
Yeah, you do.
There she is. Denise,
Yeah.
How are you tonight?
Well, I'm good. I'm sitting there listening to this interview, and I'm thinking, I understand where you're coming from, but this is still some Jesus is coming, look busy legislation. And while I understand you felt you had to do it, did you really?
Yeah.
But, you also have to look at his constituency base.
Mm-hmm.
And his constituency base is mostly older African-American people that are anywhere from middle class to upper middle class. And many of them are elderly, and they're going to think that this is a good idea because they can't, because it's coming up with anything else, it is a little harder, because it's harder to deal with the problems that have led to gun violence than it is to, do just about anything else. So, I still am interested in seeing how this legislation ultimately impacts people. But, at least he came on and he talked to us. So that's a plus.
And for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, it's in the Hall Monitor Friday newsletter, the weekly dispatch. Not the week that just passed, but the week before. Denise has a very good sort of synopsis on her take on this and generally what this type of legislation really means. Let me bring in Lance here. Get Lance.
Hi. So I guess I had never heard the council members speak that well before or that long before. I was really impressed with his humility.
Yeah.
Well, I tend to agree with Denise. I don't know that the ski mask bill is going to really do what he hopes it will do. It was really pleasant to hear an elected official say he has to learn, he has to figure things out. He understands that government can have too much red tape. I was somewhat interested to hear him talking about the role of parenting in what he thought he could do to support parents. Just very, very, I thought it was really great to hear him acknowledge he doesn't have all the answers. He wants to be a servant for his people who elected him, and he's going to try and do that. So good for him. I hope he continues to try and do those things.
Right. And on that note, Lance, in fairness to the councilman, he's starting at a disadvantage because he's coming in the middle of a term. He didn't get that sort of lead time that most of these council members get to sort of meet with people, figure out how things work before they take office. He's learning on the fly. And I imagine that's very difficult.
Denise, how did the parenting discussion seem to you?
Well, here's the thing. When I was teaching in an alternative school, I heard us talk about everything from the kids to the curriculum to the schools to everything like that. But we rarely talked about the importance of parents being accountable for their kids. And while, I appreciate that, but like it is with most things when it comes to poverty, you can't just slap a Band-Aid on certain things.
Yeah.
A lot of the people that are parenting this current generation of kids that's running around with the ski masks and the 3-wheelers and all the stuff on the streets that you're not supposed to do. A lot of them are born to parents that were young parents themselves. A lot of them are born to parents who became parents when they were like 15 or 16 years old. And I know this because I used to teach them. So what happens is you have these kids who are being asked to raise kids. And we need to provide more help in that department. We also need to provide more help in terms of helping these kids understand that birth control is your friend. Contraception is your friend. Reproductive health is your friend, because that's where some of this comes from. And we also need to address, and we kind of can't address it here because it would take entirely too long. We need to address what I like to call the chicken hawk factor. Now, for those of you on the radio who do not know what a chicken hawk is, let me explain it to you. A chicken hawk is a grown man that goes after underage girls. And when you talk to most of the kids that I used to teach who were parents at 15, 16, 17 years old, there was always a 20, 21, 22, or in some cases 25 or 30-year-old boyfriend in the mix. So if we're going to attack this problem, if we're going to attack a problem of gun violence, we've got to be a whole lot more holistic in our approach than legislation that is basically Jesus is coming, look busy. We really need to do better on that. And part of that is helping our 15 and 16-year-old parents become better parents through providing better resources, providing mentoring, providing the kinds of things that they need to help them, raise their kids successfully.
And it seems like that's one of the places where progressives and conservatives can actually agree. And I'm amazed if there's an agreement on that point, we can't figure out how to solve it. So I think if you listen to a lot of conservatives, they will talk about the failure of the nuclear family and we have to do something. And you talk to progressives who say we really have to do something to support these young parents, we should be able to come up with a program that really does that. And it's unfortunate that we have not found a way to do that. Some of the discussion around community schools may be an attempt to do it, but as you are saying, and as I thought the council member was saying, the more that we help support the families, make sure they have adequate income, make sure that they live in a decent place, make sure that when they want help and they want support, they can find it, the better the chances are that the children are going to have successful lives, however you want to define the word successful. I'd be happy to just say not incarcerated.
Well, that's successful.
Mhm.
Right.
So, Lance, one of the things that we hadn't, again, this was not our most recent newsletter, but a couple weeks ago, you were talking about this issue of chicken prices across Pennsylvania. Can you get into that for us a little bit?
Sure. I'm going to ask if we can call up the slideshow. Thanks. So I know many people have been blaming President Biden for inflation and have been talking about how difficult it is to pay for chicken, for eggs, for milk, for other basic necessities of life. And out of that time has come a real question. Why are prices going up so much? What's going on? For a number of months, maybe a couple of years, we were told about supply chain problems, that what COVID did was had supply chains, and there was a barge that went sideways in the Suez Canal, and we couldn't get the things we needed, and therefore prices had to go up. But now that we've been beyond that time period, it's starting to look a little different, and there's an opportunity to look back and see what actually happened. And the Justice Department took a look at what was happening with chicken prices. Now, most of the commodities in the United States, whether it's dairy, chicken, beef, are controlled by a handful of corporations. Over the years, because the Justice Department didn't stop mergers and looked the other way as antitrust laws were violated, the amounts of concentration of the business is extreme. So there are really only 5 chicken producers in the United States. There are a lot more. You know, if you one of those people who wants to buy free-range chicken or hormone-free chicken, or wants to buy chicken that comes from a small farm that's growing in an integrated fashion, yes, you'll find many more than 5 producers. But those producers are so small in number and have such a small share of the market that they don't have anything to do with the price. And I think most people who go shopping for free-range chicken, hormone-free chicken, organic chicken, recognize that it is not just a little more expensive, but it is significantly more expensive than the traditional chicken in the supermarket. So we see that these 5 companies are really controlling the price. And the Justice Department became involved, and they did 2 things. One is they started a criminal prosecution against the CEOs of the chicken producing companies. And the other thing they did was they sued a company that collects data, that only sells the data to the chicken producers. Now, the thing that's hard to understand is for years and years and years, we've been told that mergers make things less expensive for consumers. And well, that is, I want to be clear about this. In the short term, in the first couple months, that's almost always true. When you look at even privatization of utilities, almost every company that comes in and says, I'll buy the publicly owned water department, the publicly owned utility, I'll lower prices for the first 6 months. But after that, the prices skyrocket. And those people who are fortunate enough to fly on airplanes and are in my age bracket have seen what it means to deregulate the airplanes. Used to be that the government regulated prices, service was good, they couldn't lose your luggage, they couldn't charge you extra for a seat, they couldn't just cancel a flight without having to give you a refund. All those rules were done away with so we could have quote unquote competition. And what ends up happening with the competition is that after a few companies start, they consolidate, they buy each other up. And then whatever price competition there was, whatever service competition there was, disappears. So under regulation, the price to fly from Philadelphia to Buffalo, which isn't a very popular flight, was capped. The price to go from Philadelphia to Miami or Philadelphia to Los Angeles, which are much more popular flights, was capped. Under deregulation, the price for flying to Miami is much less than the price to flying to Buffalo. So if you have to go to Buffalo for business, or your family's from there, or you have reasons to go there, you're going to pay 3 and 4 times as much as what you used to pay. If you're going to fly to Miami, you may be able to find a less expensive ticket, but of course, you have to take your own luggage. You have to pay extra for a seat that you can fit in. And if they cancel the flight, nothing's going to happen. And we did see recently that there was a large fine issued against an airline that last year during the Christmas holidays just canceled flights and stranded riders. So in the old days, what was happening to the Justice Department is they were raising the question not about market concentration, not about the power of the companies, but in the short term, would it help consumers? And that legal argument was what the Justice Department was using to agree to all of these mergers. But it turns out that that doesn't work, and we now know that. So there's another effort on behalf of consumers that's coming forward. And what's strange about this is the United States Justice Department sued criminally. They tried to criminally prosecute the CEOs of the chicken producers. They did not go after a civil suit to try and get money back for consumers. Now, I know many people think it's a good idea to put the CEOs in jail, and they feel vindicated and they feel that that's a great thing. But for people who are struggling to put food on the table, if you said, which would you rather have? $250 back in your pocket as a refund for what you've been overcharged, or the CEO of the company to spend 6 months in jail, I think most people would actually say, I'd rather have the money. I wouldn't mind if the CEO was barred from ever running another chicken company. But, what we want is fair restitution for the price fixing. Vengeance, as they say, is for the Lord. Sending someone to jail may feel good, but it doesn't really solve the problem. So there's one state in the United States, it's not Pennsylvania, it's not New Jersey, it's not Delaware. There's one state that has decided to try to get refunds for consumers, and that's the state of Washington. The Washington State Attorney General civilly sued the chicken producers and the company that collects the data that helped the price fixing. Now, it is true that he settled the case. Most of the companies agreed when they looked at all of the information that he had that they were going to lose. And they gave back, and this is just in the state of Washington, $40.6 million. Now that is the chicken producers and the tuna producers together. So what they did in Washington is they looked at realistically who needed some help financially. And they said they're going to say anyone who's at 250% of poverty or below is going to get a refund. And that means 400,000 families in Washington state are going to get a refund, $40.6 million in total. And that's going to be about $175 per family. Now, again, it differs a little bit on the size of the family, so I'm using round numbers. So this is an example of a very successful attempt by an attorney general to stand up for the consumer of Washington state. And Washington state was smart enough to look at not just the producers, but this new way that companies have found to control prices. And we see this somewhat with the landlords as well, with tenants. Here's what happens. A company gets established, usually with money from the producers or money from the landlords, to collect data about pricing, about how much they pay farmers, about how much they pay the trucking companies, and how much chicken is actually produced. And that company collects all that data and sells it only to other chicken producers. So now the other chicken producers have instantaneous information about what everyone else is charging and what everyone else is doing, what everyone else is paying for supplies. And that allows them to collude on pricing and collude on what they pay farmers and figure out ways to go ahead and lower the supply, which of course raises the demand. In some ways, the chicken industry is going back to the bad old days of tenant farmers. So in most places, the way the chicken industry works now is they get a farmer under contract. The farmer owns the land, but the chicken company gives them the hatchlings and then agrees to buy the hatchlings at the end when they're chickens, and then agrees to sell them the feed. So they're really tenant farmers in a way. So once the information is shared about how much farmers make, and because the farmers really have no control now, they get the chicks from the company and they sell the grown chickens to the company. They don't really have a free market where they can sell to. This information is incredibly powerful. And it allows the producers to figure out what they should do to keep the prices up. Washington State figured this out. They sued civilly, and they went ahead and sued the producers and this data collecting agencies. And this is an example where some of the corporations where many of us are not particularly happy about are actually joining in. So McDonald's is now one of the complainants in the ongoing suit, saying that they have been overcharged for chicken. There's a unique part of the chicken industry which grows chicken specifically for chicken franchises, whether it's Kentucky Fried Chicken or Popeyes or McDonald's or Burger King. Those chickens are of a different size and a different quality than the chickens most people buy to put on the table. So this information, again, is what was critical for the price fixing. And Washington State made these claims, laid them out there, and went ahead and said to the corporations, if you're not going to give a refund, if you're not going to settle with us, we're going to sue you and get much bigger damages by the end. It is exactly the opposite of what the U.S. Justice Department did. The U.S. Justice Department did not go after the companies on a civil complaint. They went after them criminally. Now, in the hearing, there were two separate cases. The first one was what's called a hung jury. The jury couldn't come to a decision, and the U.S. Department went ahead and retried. In the second trial, they were also not able to get a conviction. But during those hearings, we found out some incredible information. The defense, the chicken growers, admitted that they were sharing prices. They admitted that they were texting to each other about how to keep prices higher. They admitted that they called each other right around the time they were setting prices. But the defense lawyer said, well, they could have been calling about anything. Maybe they're calling about the weather, or maybe they're calling about holiday plans. So the fact that they were calling each other about the prices at the same time the prices were set doesn't mean they were actually talking about the prices.
It's a chicken cartel.
Yes, it is a chicken cartel.
It's unbelievable.
And I think what the defense lawyer argument is that the chicken companies aren't doing anything a smart business person wouldn't do. Know what your competition's selling for, and then agree to set the price. Those admissions are all admissions towards a civil antitrust suit, which is what Washington State did. The U.S. Justice Department chose not to do that, and we don't know why. But we do know that they're continuing their suit against the collector of information, the company that collects all the informations. As I said earlier, even McDonald's recognizes that it's being cheated. Now, if you think about McDonald's, it's this multinational, humongous corporation that has tentacles throughout the world. If they say they're being cheated by the chicken producers, you have to begin to wonder how bad is it. So they are going after the companies Pilgrim's Pride, Sanderson Farms, Purdue Farms, because of the price fixing. And they believe that is all done like the United States Justice Department, like the Washington State Attorney General does, through this collection of data, through this company called AgriStats. Again, I want to highlight that. AgriStats collects the data, but will only sell the data to chicken producers. And there is an interlocking board on who's on AgriStats board of and who owns the chicken companies. They are not exactly the same, but they are almost the same. And that's what happens also now with the landlords giving all the information about the tenants to someone who collects data, and that data is available for other landlords. So if one landlord decides he doesn't like you as a tenant and reports you, that information is given to the next landlord. So when you go ahead and you try and rent another place, that shows up when they do a credit report or when they pay for this company to report on it. So as we see, in the old days, the company CEOs might have all gotten together at a country club or on vacation or flown to the Bahamas, wherever, and talked and smoked cigars, whatever. Now they're much more sophisticated. They don't have to do that. They simply start a data collection company, share the information that way. And again, what we're seeing is for the first time, and I know people have a significant number of issues around President Biden, but for the first time, we're seeing President Biden's Justice Department actually look at these data collection companies and sue under the existing antitrust laws. And again, as I was saying earlier about the importance of families, that's both a progressive and a conservative issue. Many conservatives really believe in antitrust legislation. And it's somewhat horrific to think that these conservatives who will talk about antitrust and breaking up the big businesses actually are now trying to defund the Justice Department and getting in the way of those type of prosecutions. Now, Washington State consumers right around this time, and for many people, it's a good time to get a check, getting $150, $175 family. Pennsylvania consumers are getting nothing. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is Pennsylvania doesn't have an antitrust law. So we can only use the existing laws in the federal government. But what's more important than that is our Attorney General has no interest in following this up. Now, to be fair, we sent an email to her. We said, hey, do you know about what's going on in Washington State? Are you planning to join their lawsuit? Are you planning to follow in their footsteps? What are you planning to do? And we got absolutely no response. And that, again, becomes one of the very serious problems that we face is we have an Attorney General who, unlike Washington State, unlike in Washington, D.C., is a Republican and is refusing to use the antitrust laws in Washington to prosecute the chicken companies and to get refunds. Even if she's not as successful as the Washington State Attorney General, she gets only $100 back per family, not $175. I think most people would be thankful that she's actually doing something. I don't have an answer for why she's not doing it. As I said, we wrote to her. We said, if Washington State's able to do this, can't we do it? And we got no response. Now, I want to just talk very briefly, because I know we're running out of time, about what the effect of the price fixing has been. Because as we have faced an inflationary period and the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates, which makes it much harder for people to buy cars and buy homes. And, you know, credit card companies make every excuse they can to charge exorbitant interest rates on whatever bills people have. So the Federal Reserve raising interest rates has helped the credit companies, helped the and hurt regular consumers. But really, what is going on with the inflation? And is it true that these price fixing and these type of arrangements that are made by corporate America to collude on pricing is causing inflation? And we can see that if we look at a really brief chart, and I'm not sure how easy this is for people to look at, but I'm just going to say Albertsons, which happens to be one of the largest supermarkets in America, has seen their profits go up by 671. And if you look at now this is from 2020 till today, and this comes from the Guardian newspaper. And you look at the average US workers' wages, it's gone up 1.6%. So we see, if you look at Amazon, 333% increase. You look at Chevron Oil, 144%. You look at Hershey Foods, 62%. You see all these incredibly profitable companies that are profitable to a large extent because they've continued to raise prices by pointing at inflation or by pointing at supply chain problems, by pointing at anything other than their own profits. I know we're going to have a United States Senate race where there's going to be this type of discussion. Were there windfall profits during COVID? Is that part of the reason why we had such an inflationary period? Or was it all based on the problems that were created when President Trump and President Biden shut down the economy to deal with COVID? But I think this chart is very clear. During that period, profits for the corporations went up. And I think it's also very clear that if Washington State can sue under the antitrust laws and get rebates, that it's something that Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware should be willing to do as well. The worst that can happen is our Attorney General is not successful and has to answer the question, Why was it possible for the Attorney General of Washington State to do it and not possible for her?
Right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for that report. And it's always distressing when there's something right there that's been done elsewhere that our people here in Pennsylvania won't do.
Right. I'm also saddened. I mean, it's a great opportunity for Hall Monitor to call attention to it, but the truth is we're a relatively small news service. The Philadelphia Inquirer has a consumer reporter. I don't understand why she's not writing about it. I don't understand why this isn't a huge story. There are chicken farmers in Delaware. At one point, Delaware had a significant amount of chicken farming. Now, I know they're getting squeezed, and I know there are fewer and fewer farmers making a living at farming. But you would think in the Delaware Valley, in our region, that this would be of interest, that the Attorney General of Delaware would be defending the right of the chicken farmers so that they don't get squeezed out of business, that we would have a major media look at the attorney generals of each state and send their cameras up there to get interviews. Now, we're trying to get an interview, but the truth is, and again, to be humble like the council member, we're not in a position to put it on the state television airways to say, here's the attorney general refusing to answer questions, refusing to defend Pennsylvania consumers in the way that a national television company could. If you go online, you can find stories about it. If you look for people who follow antitrust legislation, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. It's not secret. It's not hard to find, but you have to want to tell the story. You have to want to be the three of us saying, there is news here that's important for people to get, and we're going to do our best to get it to them. And unfortunately, all too often, we don't see that interest. And as a result, consumers, voters, citizens don't have the information they need to understand what's going on around them. It's a lot easier to lie and confuse a person who doesn't have facts than it is to lie and confuse a person who understands what's going on. I think anyone who says the reason why we had such an inflation was because of Joe Biden, who looks at what the corporate profits have gone up compared to the wages, is really going to be in a slightly different position.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I do want to mention in this week's newsletter, I wrote about SEPTA. SEPTA board is meeting at 3:00 this Thursday to vote on the still new proposal for the bus revolution. Now, the new proposal doesn't include any of the times that you'll have to wait for the new bus lines. So again, here's the process. They hired a consultant, top-down design. People showed up, said absolutely not. Council member Kenyatta Johnson held hearings. SEPTA was forced to go back to the drawing board. They did away with a whole bunch of the transfers that they were looking at. Then they were forced to go back again. They put a whole bunch of routes back. Then they had hearings. 100 people showed up and protested. And then they did still another revision. But this most current revision, which is the revision that will be before the board on Thursday at 3:00 at 1234 Market Street, doesn't talk about the frequency of the lines. So it's really hard to know whether this is better or worse. I'm just going to point out that if you're one of those people who is saying there's no bus near me, and they say, okay, well, we'll put a bus near you, but the bus runs every other hour, it's not really the same as saying we're going to put a bus line near you, and that bus is going to run every 15 minutes or every half an hour. And we still don't know the most popular routes. Those of us who are a little older will call it the C bus, but it's really the 4 bus, the bus that runs up and down Broad Street. We don't know how often that's going to run now. We don't know how often the 45, which is the old 23, was the trolley. It's now the bus that goes all the way from South Philly to Chestnut Hill. We don't know how often that's going to run. So there's many, many questions. The hearing examiner's report said that she hopes that SEPTA will make sure that the people who are losing their lines have an alternative route. But she doesn't say what routes are being lost, and she doesn't say what alternatives there are, and she makes no recommendation. So I'm hoping that the board will look at this and say, we're not there yet, and make a decision. Especially kind of crazy to do it at a time when in 3 weeks we'll have a new mayor, new city council, and maybe new interest in SEPTA.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Lance. Thank you, Denise. And we will see everybody on January 3rd on Hall Monitor. Thank you for being with us.
Merry Christmas.